So our agenda, we'll do the introductions, tell you what you're going to learn in the short time we have together, hopefully. Um, Define what the challenge is, why we're talking about this. Go over what isn't batch processing and what is batch processing and what a queued batch is. And then move on to examples and demos and a short epilogue and then Q&A. We'll probably save the questions for the Q&A session as opposed to during, simply because while I'm going through the PowerPoint or while Vera is, we can't see the sidebar. The person speaking can't see the sidebar with the questions. So um, we're not ignoring you if you wait till the end. I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Vera Lialka. Vera is the O&M team lead for Pixel on USA's AgriLinks and Resilience Links, is the recipient of a 2016 DC Femtech Power Women Programmers and Designers Award. Vera speaks Russian and Ukrainian as well as English, fortunately for the presentation. Enjoys reading, working out, distance running, spending time with her children, an awesome cat, and playing the guitar, singing, and acting.
So I will introduce my fellow coworker Jeff Greenberg, who is a Drupal developer since 2007, O&M team lead for Bixel on DEA.gov project, Drupal author and columnist, enjoys distance running as well, photography and traveling with his dog when possible. Jeff has run a full marathon, been to the top inside the Great Pyramid, and show jumped horses way back when. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you. So, what you'll learn, why large volume transactions are a challenge, what is not batch processing, what is batch processing, and what is queued batch processing, how to create and process a batch, how to create a drush command to process a batch, how to create and process a queued batch. So, what is the challenge that we're trying to deal with? Let's take a look at, in describing the challenge, what is not batch processing. So when we're in Drupal, and let's say we have a couple nodes to process in some repetitive way, we can simply create a form and click go and let Drupal go off and load each node and process it and be done with it. Just like these TSA agents processing the teddy bears waiting to get on their flight. With that level of volume, which I call nominal, there's really not an issue in terms of resources. In this case, we have enough people to handle the load. And in the case where you just have a small amount of memory or time needed, there's not a problem in just running the process. When you add a little volume to that and you reach low volume transactions, you might then run into a resource problem. In this case, you can see we have more people or more teddies waiting to be processed than we have people. So what typically happens, you'll get a message at some point saying that you've exhausted memory. And we would handle that in most cases, if we can, by going into PHP-INI and upping the memory allowed. And that would get us through. That may not be the best plan ongoing, but it is one way to address it. When we move up into medium volume, as you can see here, the line's getting a bit longer. Then we might need to add processing time because we've already added the memory that we want to add, and apparently that wasn't sufficient to get everything done in the amount of time that we have available for the process that's running. So you can see here the arrive in advance notice has been lengthened. And we can do that in PHP-INI as well. Again, not necessarily the best ongoing way to handle it. But what happens when we move into high volume transactions? So we've used up the option of adding memory in this example, and we've also gone to as much allowable time as we want to allow. So at that point, as you can see here, no more time, no more memory, no more resources. In fact, we've been abandoned. So the only option seems to be punting. So let's take a look at the flow of what isn't a batch. And as I said, we start with the form, we click submit. In this case, in this example, we'll do an entity query and we'll get back some node IDs, load a node, maybe change a field value, save the node. Are we done? Nope, let's iterate until we are. And it's typically in there where we're going to run into a resource problem, either after loading a number of nodes or just into time spent doing this. So what is batch processing? Batch processing, as defined by Oxford Languages, is the processing of previously collected jobs in a single batch. I can't help but notice that I've always been told never use the word you're defining in the definition, but they don't seem to have a problem with that here. So in the case of a batch, again, we have the form and the submit. We do our entity query. This time we're going to store the node IDs in a batch, and then we might let the batch just sit and wait until we run cron, for example. And when cron runs, then it's going to do the iteration that we did earlier. Presumably, this is going to be when there's less of a resource drain on the site, maybe late at night, so we won't run into the same problems, hopefully. But what if we do? What if your batch blows up in the middle, for example? And what if what you're doing with the batch doesn't make it easy for you to figure out where you left off so that maybe you can create a batch that's a subset of what you had the first time? Then things get a bit dicey. So that's when we want to consider a queued batch. So queue, British English for the most part, in this context is what we call lining up or queuing up. And in computing, it's basically when you store things in a retrievable fashion in a definite order. So what makes queued batch a better thing to use, and once you're comfortable, I predict you'll find yourself using queued batches where you don't necessarily have to. It's just it's got benefits that it's nice to have, and once you're used to doing it, have a template, so to speak. You'll probably find yourself using it a lot. What you do when creating a queued batch is you're going to, let's say, do your entity query again, get your list of node IDs, and you're going to create a queue. And Vera is going to show you how that's done. And when the queue is created, which contains the node IDs, when you process the queue, it's going to go through the iteration again. What's different in this case is that if something aborts, since the queue is stored in a particular order in the database and is marked up as it's being processed, the system knows where it left off. You tell it how much time it has to process each batch in the queue. It will process until time has run out, and it knows where it left off and where it's going to start. So that's a definite benefit. One thing I want to point out is over here, I always recommend if you're working, let's say, with nodes, for example, what you want to do is just gather the node IDs in your entity query and store them. Don't load the actual nodes and grab other information and store that as well, because that's when you're going to find yourself exhausting your resources. if you just do the query to get the IDs and then let the resource-heavy things wait until the system is processing the queue, you'd be much better off and have less chance of aborting. So with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Vera and let her show you the magic.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I think this is how it's done. Okay, so first example, first demo, we're gonna do the batch processing, the simple one via batch API with Ajax processing bar. So first I'm just gonna explain what Drupal.org says about batch operations. It can be defined as the functions allowing forms processing to be spread out over several page requests, which ensure that the processing does not get interrupted because of PHP timeout, while allowing the user to receive feedback on the progress of the ongoing operations. In this demo, we'll create a batch process to delete all nodes. But first, we will define the form. We're going to just add the simple delete all node button. And in this form, we're going to have a submit handler, where we're going to have a operations array. It's operations to be performed on each node. Batch array is an array of steps to be performed in a batch process. And finish, that the implementation of a callback finished that's executed after batch is completed. And then we call the batch set method, which had the new batch into the batch. And next, we can add these two methods, delete nodes examples and delete node finished. Am I playing I don't think I'm playing the slides. 1 second. I think I'm just doing it the wrong way. So the first, okay, I hope you can see it better now. So delete nodes example is the function that calls on each operation. So we just load all the nodes and delete them. And the next method will be delete node finish, which is called on the end of the batch process, which will do some processing and messaging to the user at the end. And next is I'm going to do the demos right after I go through the slides. I think it's easier to do this batch processing with the custom rush 9 command. In this way, we normally batch jobs are launched by the form. However, what we can do if we want the cron tab to launch them at a regular basis, one of the best solutions is to use a custom rush command. And we're going to create a custom rush 9 command that loads all the nodes of a content type passed in as an argument, for example, page, article, or other content type. Then the batch process will simulate a long operation on each node. The first will create a batch service PHP and class for the batch operations. A batch process is made of two main callbacks. One is a node process my node, and another one, a process my node finished. The process my node is called for processing of each batch, and the process my node finished is launched when the batch processing is finished. And also, you can see in this method, we simulate the long operation using the use lit PHP function right here. And when the process my node finished is launched when the batch processing is finished. And here we just given the user a message, an account of all the operations that have been performed. I will also present it at the end of all the demos that I go through the slide. And then when we have to create the actual drush command, in the drush command, we will create the service that will process and update each node. And each node will have to log the start of the script. This is happening right here. Then we retrieve all the nodes of this type using the regular entity type manager. The storage, we just get all the nodes. Then we create an operation array for the batch. And we also have the operations array where we call the process node function on each node. And we have the on finished of the batch, we have a process node finished. And I'll show you this after we go through all the demos slides. The third one is article queue using the queue worker and ultimate cron. In this demo, we're just gonna use the API to collect the data from a different repository and save it in the queue, and then insert the articles in our site on our own schedule. So in this one, apologize. In this one, we have the article queue article cron job. It's a cron job for article publisher that will just keep it in a .module file. And what we do, we just, the queue worker allows us to run this queue with time limits. And the API will allow us to revert the items back to the queue if any failure occurs. So it's important that we can run multiple queues without interrupting other work. And in this demo, we create the queue worker that, like I said, will fetch the forum data from another repo using API and create an article on our existing site. This process will run automatically based on cron. The first will create the configuration form to store API link and credentials. This is where we just, after we enter the connection site, URL, site username, and site password, we have our configuration saved. In the module file, we create this job for article publisher method. The first will create a queue factory object and use this object to instantiate a queue object of article queue processor. Next, we'll call the create item method right here. And the create item method will put the items in the queue. And next, since we're gonna use the ultimate cron job for processing the cron, we'll need to create a config file for it. And we're gonna put it inside the config install folder. And if your module already exists and already enabled, you just have to import it via config import. So next one, we create a class article queue processor PHP to call process items that will process the queue. In this class, we're going to define the process item method to create a node from the data received in API. And this class will go into SRC plugin queue worker folder. To check this manually, we can navigate to the cron jobs and run the cron article queue worker. And there's a queue manager where we can monitor how many items are left in the queue. We also can run the queue in there to run the job. This is that process item function that I was talking about that will save in the node in our system. The fourth one is a queue worker sending emails response via manual trigger. So this one, we can have a form that's available to the user, and user can make a request form. There's a form on our website that user can make a request, and they submit a request, and instead of sending email at the runtime, we'll store these details in queue worker and later run the queue worker manually whenever we want to receive the emails. So the queue API allows placing items in the queue and processing them later. If you have a task, for example, that must be done regularly and it takes more time to complete than cron queue, might be a better solution for you. In the below example, we create a form for sending email. Emails will be added to the queue by submitting the form, and cron run emails will be dequeued. The first, we define the queue worker by creating the queue worker folder inside the plugin folder, SRC, plugin, and queue worker. And in that folder, we'll create our queue worker file class, email queue.php. And in this file, we're going to have the process item method. The email will be added to your email queue. Then we'll create the form queue PHP for sending emails which contain the email subject and message fields. In a submit handler, we are creating the queue, email queue, and adding the data to queue which contains email subject and message. In the queue table, we can see that that our queue is built up and our emails are being to be sent as added into the queue. So this is just a hook mail that helps us send emails, and this is the email queue how it looks, when the people submit their requests. Now I'm gonna try to switch back. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'm gonna go back to where. Hold on. Yep. So this is end of my demo, and I'm just gonna demo each demo individually. This is the demo of a batch processing launch by form, where I told you there is a one button in the form that upon clicking, it just gives you a processing bar and process all the items you have to process that's in your batch. So you just click on delete notes, and at the end, the process bar is going through the items and give you a response at the end. So, and it says like this many posts are processed. The second one is the article queue form. This is where we use the cron jobs, and this is our form to collect the API information. And then we can go to the cron jobs, and we see our article queue worker, which can run on a particular schedule and can add items to the queue. So I'll run it once, and run it second time. Each time it adds about 10 items to the queue. And then we can go to our queue manager, and if we refresh it, we can see that our task worker node has 30 items to process. So either can be processed with each cron run, or we can just execute it right here manually by just running the batch process in the queue manager. So if you apply the selected items, it just runs, and there are 0 items left to process. The third one was the second one was demo of our custom drush command. So we created drush command, and this drush command is gonna put items in the queue, and then it's gonna process it. At the end, it's gonna give you just a message. So this is how you just run this command, by running the drush update node command. It's preparing the batch, and now just running the batch, and now it's completed the batch, so we're done. And the demo number 4, it's the query form where user submits the request, and this request is being processed, and emails being queued, and emails are sent on our own schedule. And you just add one, you can add another one, then you can go back to our queue manager, refresh it, and you will see that our custom email queue worker has 2 items. So the course of the day or something that is gonna build up items, and then we can run these items, and this job will send emails back to the users. We can run it here or wait for the cron to run. And you just run it here manually, and 0 items left to process. So this concludes our demo, and I'm turning it back to Jeff.
Go back to the slide. All right. So Vera and I both work for Bixel. I have to admit I was a little conflicted this morning whether I should wear my Bixel shirt or wear a Star Trek command shirt because Captain Kirk went up today. But you can see I opted for the Bixel shirt because Bixel's awesome. So stop by our booth if you care to and take a look at what we do. And if you're interested, join us. The code. We fully understand that using batches and queuing things is an easy concept to explain in terms of why you would want to do it, but that the code has a lot of moving parts, and covering it in 10, 15 minutes probably is as clear as mud. So we will be posting the code from these examples somewhere. We just don't know where to do that yet, whether it's going to be GitHub or somewhere else. So here are our two email addresses. Oh, and I forgot to change yours. That should be a period there. Period. Yeah, not an underscore. They're both period, should be. And you can contact us unless there's a way to find it through GovCon once we're done as to where the code is or any other questions you might have. And with that, I'll stop sharing and we'll go into Q&A. Oh, Tim's back.
Yeah, I just allowed Conrad Wong, but then he didn't pop up here, so I'm not sure if he had a question asked.
So a question of what feature of DEA.gov do they use batch processing? Actually do not use it in the normal scheme of things. There's basically DEA.gov is more of a presence site, and the interactive parts of it are really form submittal, such as contact forms that get processed as somebody enters it. Where I use it on DEA.gov and have used it on DEA.gov is when we're having to do things to add new features or to convert existing features in some way, such as adding fields, pre-populating new fields. For example, the location of offices and divisions. Sometimes if you're adding new ones, they're of a new type, and then you have to go back and account for the fact that there's a new type existing, and it's something that has to be done on a number of records. I'd say the biggest example is when I had to change something to do with all of the nodes. And it was a matter of, well, do I click submit and go, or do I take into account that there's tens of thousands of nodes, and that's probably not a good idea. And luckily, I went with that opinion and used a queued batch to do that processing. That's a good example, Jess. Jess said, I use batch processing heavily when working with external API to import content into my site. And that's a great use of it.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, it's solves a lot of problems. And in my previous project, we had the shopping cart where all the warehouse stock information being held someplace else, and we just had to get this information on a daily basis. The most updated, so I had to get all the information about all the products on our site. It had to be running the process daily, so it's very helpful.
It's equally useful on the other end if you're providing a feed. Sometimes, depending on volume, it might be better to use a queued batch for the feed to respond to it. I think one quick example of where I've used it before in the non-government world is when I was doing the Winter Olympics. If you can imagine the amount of data that comes across in a day from every athlete, every event, even in skiing, where they made each turn and what time it was. There's just far too much data to try and process it all at once. Sure. Oh, beat me to the draw. Our email addresses are in the chat if you want those in order to get the code. Yep. Steve said they use Q on va.gov to push data to an external API. Yep. Great use. Anybody else? We still have some time left if there's any more questions.
Exactly, that's the whole point. It's that way, if the API fails, the queued item stays in the queue. That was Steve Rhodes commenting. That's a great way to use the queued API.
And not only do they stay in the queue, but because they're in the queue and the queue is ordered, it knows where to start the next time around. There is, by the way, we didn't cover it, but there is a way to use Guzzle with Symfony in order to in order to create the queue. I'm not clear actually yet. I've tried to do a deep dive into it, and I'm just not clear yet on if there's a definitive benefit on doing it that way as opposed to doing it just through Drupal. In both cases, you would use Drupal's queue worker afterwards to do the processing. So. Okay, well, if that is it for the questions, on behalf of Vera and myself, thank you for coming to our session. We hope that it was worth your time. And again, please take those emails. Feel free to contact us with any questions you have. And if you want the code, we'll let you know.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.